In the early 2000s, two titans of the wine world clashed. Jancis Robinson and Robert Parker had both tasted the 2003 Chateau Pavie, and their ratings and descriptions of the wine could not have been more different. Parker loved it and Jancis Robinson hated it. And in this video, I'm going to taste this wine in order to set the record straight. But this is not the only controversial wine that I'm going to taste in this video. I've prepared a whole lineup of wines that are loved by some and hated by others. And then there are people who just love to hate those wines. So let's dive in. Taste is subjective, and it's therefore impossible to produce a wine that everyone loves. What's more, over time, the palate of an experienced taster will develop and change, so even the same person might not like the wines that he or she tasted 10, 20 or 30 years ago. While a wine beginner might look for familiar fruity flavors and a juicy texture balancing off the acidity with some sweetness, an experienced taster oftentimes looks for something more extreme. For example, wines with an extreme mouthfeel or extraordinary flavors that they might not have experienced before. I think that's also the case with music. Kids' music is usually easygoing with predictable lyrics. Many adults continue listening to easygoing music with predictable lyrics, but some people who want to dive deeper into the matter want extreme sound and unpredictable lyrics like your Bob Dylan or MF Doom, for example. All of the wines I'm going to taste are challenging in one way or another, but am I going to like those challenges? Let's find out. So I'm starting off with the Blue Nun 24K Gold Edition from Germany, I'm sad to say. So this bottle actually came in an unmarked cardboard box wrapped in bubble wrap, kind of not really suggesting high quality wine, but obviously there's gold in there, so it's gotta be fancy. Right? Blue Nun is a brand that is pretty famous or infamous all around the world. It was created in 1921 by Sichel Söhne in Germany. And when I started researching the company, I realized that they are related to the Sichel family that also owns Chateau Pavie in Bordeaux. I also found out that Peter Max Ferdinand Sichel, who was responsible for making Blue Nun a big success in the US, was previously the head of the office of the CIA in Berlin. In 1992, the Beastie Boys published a piece called Blue Nun on their album Check Your Head, where they sampled a piece of dialogue by Peter Sichel. It starts with, "Our evening began in Peter Sichel's comfortable study in his New York townhouse." And you can hear a bottle of Blue Nun rattling at the end of the song Long, Long, Long by the Beatles. Crazy. Blue Nun is famous for the cheap and cheerful, slightly sweet Liebfrauenmilch, but this is something else. This is a sweet, aromatized, sparkling wine-based drink, and they added gold to it. The wine was made using grapes from the European Union, and I have no idea how they got the bubbles into the wine, but I guess that they just injected some CO2. So let's taste this and see whether it's any good. It's actually pretty frothy. There's a lot of CO2 developing here. So let's see what it tastes like. I mean, they say it's aromatized, but I don't really think there's a lot of additional aroma. I wouldn't have guessed that it's aromatized. I mean, it is fruity. There's quite a lot of mango, peach notes coming through, a little bit of apricot as well, ripe apple. But yeah, those are all flavors that you can also get from wine. Whoa. On the palate, it is kind of sweet and sour, but the sourness is really harsh. The sweetness is quite cloying, so there's no harmony at all there. It's just really bad wine. The gold really doesn't serve any purpose. It's inert, so it doesn't or it shouldn't react with the wine. You can drink it, but you will also kind of discard it in the end. So yeah, you should probably spend more money on the quality of your wine rather than throwing gold in there, hoping that it will turn this into a luxury product. So I'm going to rate this 65 points, but I don't really think there's any reason to buy this. I mean, don't drink wine with gold in it if the gold is actually more valuable than the wine. Just makes you look kind of stupid. So let's move on to the next wine, which is the 2023 Pheasant Qvevri from Georgia. The winery was founded in 2007 by Georgian winemaker Gela Petalishvili and American artist John Wodeman. And they became kind of iconic fairly quickly. The wines are controversial because they are natural, pretty wild, and kind of funky. I tasted them the first time when I was in Tbilisi, Georgia, to visit some of the vineyards, and I stopped by at Vino Underground, one of the most famous wine bars in Georgia, and tasted the glass. And well, I didn't love what I was tasting, but I also found it pretty fascinating. Pheasant has definitely helped establish Georgia's reputation internationally for low intervention wines that are made in a really ancient way. And for that, the winery ought to be applauded. By the way, if you want to learn more about Georgia and its wines, then check out cellarclass.com, my independent e-learning platform. We just published a course on Georgian wine, so you can learn everything you want to learn about Georgia in that course. So now back to the wine. This wine is their Kisi. Kisi is an indigenous grape variety from Georgia that can produce outstanding results. The wine was fermented and aged in qvevri, in those clay amphoras that are buried into the ground. And yeah, I'm guessing that this is going to be a little wild, but let's see. So natural wines are definitely controversial. Lots of people argue that they are terrible, faulty, and wild and weird. And many people also say, I love it. And this is natural, so it's got to be good. Yeah, well, I'm kind of in the middle. I really think natural wines are great if they are great, just as wines. I don't really care all that much whether the producer has added a little bit of sulfur or a little more sulfur, as long as the wine isn't affected by it and I can just enjoy the wine. If you don't add any sulfites, which is kind of the principle of some natural wine producers, then the wines are less stable and they can go wrong or they can taste faulty, and that's not necessarily something I enjoy. Wine is never a natural product. It's always a cultural product, so it's always made by humans. So I think the name is just wrong. But anyways, let's taste this. In Georgia, people talk about amber wine when they talk about wines made in qvevri. And I think the name is quite fitting, even though this is actually more bronze than amber. It kind of looks, it looks a little wild, but let's taste it. So this clearly has some oxidative notes. It smells of soy sauce. It smells of, well, oxidized wine, but it also has some really interesting flavors there. And there's a little bit of blood orange flavor coming through, peach notes as well, bruised fruit. So it's kind of wild, but not necessarily bad. On the palate, this is grippy and intense. If the wine is fermented in qvevri, it usually is fermented on the skins, and oftentimes there's also stem inclusion there. So the wine just tastes very different compared to if you would use those white grapes, press them, and then just ferment the juice. Here we have lots of tannins, different kind of acidity, different kind of flavor. But I quite like that. I'm definitely a fan of qvevri wines. I think this is definitely more on the wild side. So this is not for someone who just wants to get into qvevri wines and wants to taste the first qvevri wine. There's some Kisis that are much more subtle, much more elegant, less wild and rough. This one is definitely a rough guy. So this kind of flavor also creates a problem, because usually in most rating systems, wines that are flawed, that have, for example, notes of oxidation, should actually be removed from the rating, or you should give them the lowest score. I don't think that's quite right. I mean, there is some oxidation here, but there's also something else there. This is actually still a harmonious wine that is quite interesting. So just like I sometimes like a little bit of bread, I don't mind a little bit of oxidation. I'm actually going to rate this 91 points. I think it is very interesting, absolutely delicious, but it's definitely also a controversial wine. I mean, serve this at a party at your house with some friends and family who are not from the wine business, and they won't like this. I'm pretty sure they won't like this. But if you know the whole story about this winery, about the style of wine, about qvevri winemaking, then you might you might just get it. The next one is definitely controversial. It's the 2022 Meiomi Pinot Noir from California. And it's a wine that lots of people from the wine business talk about a lot. Meiomi was established in 2006 by Joe Wagner from the Wagner family, who also own Camus, which is another kind of controversial winery. Meiomi means coast in the language of the Wapo native people from Northern California. And I think that is a reference to the fact that in California, most Pinot Noir plantings are actually along the coast. The grapes are sourced from Sonoma, Monterey, and Santa Barbara, so counties that are pretty close to the coast and are influenced by the coast. In California, the Pacific coast actually is fairly cool, and that's best for Pinot Noir. So this kind of suggests that this should be a lighter, fresher, crisper style of Pinot. So let's see whether that's actually the case. And I think from the tone of my voice, you can hear that that's not what I'm expecting this wine to taste like. Yeah, I mean, Meiomi is kind of known for not tasting like Pinot, but to be honest, I haven't really tasted this wine very often. So yeah, I'm looking forward to trying it. Let's see. So this definitely is pretty dark for a Pinot. I mean, I've seen dark Pinots before, but this is definitely a very dark Pinot. So this might be from the fruit. They're talking about cold soak, trying to extract more color from the skins, which is a process that kind of works, but they might also just add a few grapes in there that will give quite a lot of color. Tinturier grapes that just help make a wine darker in color. It's definitely quite aromatic. There's lots of ripe cherry fruit flavor, blackberries. It's quite intense. There's also fine oak in the background. I mean, it's not super oaky. It's not super chocolatey and roasty. So there's not like extreme oak there, but you can definitely feel the oak in the background. But yeah, the fruit flavor is intense. There's definitely quite a lot of ripe flavor. And that's not necessarily what you would expect from Pinot. Pinot tends to be a little more elegant, a little more refined. And this is bulky and muscular. Now you also get a little bit of chocolate notes, dark chocolate, cacao kind of flavor coming through. So it's getting sweeter as it's being exposed to air. I mean, not sweet in the sense of sugary, but kind of sweeter flavors like chocolate, vanilla, ripe fruit, like jammy notes. That's definitely what I'm getting. On the palate, however, there's definitely some sugar. It's quite sweet and extracted. I mean, it's not a sweet wine, but it feels like there's some residual sugar there. The alcohol is actually not extremely high at 13.5%. So that is not very high for Pinot, but it definitely has this very round, kind of sweet, rich, velvety mouthfeel. Meiomi was described as a Pinot made for people who don't like Pinot. So it's kind of a wine that is made for people who think Pinot is great, so they should drink more Pinot, but are not actually enjoying the Pinots that they are tasting because they are too light colored, maybe too fine and elegant, too acidic. So this is, it says Pinot, but it doesn't really feel like Pinot. I think this could be an interesting wine for blind tasting. And I do think many people would say this is Zin. Zinfandel kind of has those ripe, slightly cooked aromas. Oftentimes it's kind of rich and bulky on the palate. And the color also kind of fits. So yeah, maybe this is more for people who like Zin, but want to drink something with Pinot on the label because it's more sophisticated. That said, even though this is not something I enjoy, and even though this is not a classic Pinot by any means, it's still made well. I mean, it's a decent wine. There are no flaws there. It's not something I like, but it's okay. So I would say this is an above average wine. It's not diluted, light, or kind of bland. It definitely has concentration and power. And I'm going to rate this 82 points. So some people might now say, oh my God, Konstantin, you can't rate this wine 82 points. But yeah, I mean, if it was just about whether this wine tastes like Pinot or not, I would rate it differently. But if I just base the rating on the quality in the glass, I would say 82 is a fair score. So let's move on to the next wine, which is the 2021 The Prisoner from Napa. Well, actually, I think it's from California, but it's bottled in Napa by Prisoner Wine Company. So they might be sourcing grapes from all over the Golden State here. The brand was established in 2000 and they now work with around about 100 growers all over Northern California. The wine is a blend of Zinfandel, Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Syrah, Syrah, Merlot and Malbec. So quite a big range of different grape varieties. And it became a massive success in the early 2000s. And I think it still is a pretty big success. I think the wine is a bit controversial because it's a brand. It's not linked to a winery or a vineyard. They source grapes from all over the place and produce pretty large amounts of wine. They also try to change the market a little bit by making this wine fairly affordable. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's not super expensive, even though it's a strong brand. And it just became very successful. And as soon as a wine brand becomes successful, many people start poo-pooing on it. So let's give it a fair shake and let's taste this. Even though it's a blend of Zin, Cabernet Sauvignon, and so on and so forth, it almost looks lighter in color compared to the Meiomi Pinot Noir. So that's a bit odd. So this shows quite a lot of lifted fruit flavors. There is cassis aroma coming through, blackberries, raspberries. There's also cherry notes, definitely. There's a little bit of chocolate and charred wood character coming through, even though this doesn't feel oaky. It's more fruit driven, I'd say. On the palate, this is big and bold. I mean, 15.5% of alcohol. So you definitely feel the alcohol. It's kind of sweet and round, even though it definitely has less sugar than the Meiomi. I'd say this is pretty dry. But yeah, due to that high amount of alcohol, it kind of feels a little sweet on the palate. I mean, the tannins are grippy, structured. And yeah, this is kind of a rich and hedonistic style. I definitely think it lacks a little bit of elegance and balance. It definitely is quite full on and powerful. It feels like a burger wine, really dominated by Zinfandel in its flavor, composition, and texture. So, I mean, it's good. It's not a bad wine by any means, but it's a little over the top. But if you like big and bold wines, this might be exactly what you love. And yeah, I'm going to rate it 90 points. I think it is clear, bright, fruit driven. It has lots of power. It's quite on the nose, but it's well made. So yeah, 90 points should work. So the next wine is the 2024 Doppio Passo from Puglia. It's a primitivo, the same grape variety as Zinfandel. And this is a major success here in Germany, but I think in many markets around the world. Puglia is in the south of Italy. It's the Tacco Alto, the high heel of Italy, and it produces really concentrated, rich, mostly red wines. The winery was started in 1928 as a family business, but it's now part of a big consortium. And this style of wine is interesting. They kind of say that they harvest the grapes at two different points. So they harvest ripe grapes first, and then they go into the vineyards again to harvest kind of overripe grapes and mix the wines that result from those two different types of grapes. And then you get like a wine that is a little over the top, but not too much over the top. I mean, it's at 13% of alcohol, so it's not a super alcoholic wine, but it usually has kind of those slightly stewed, cooked, or raisinated fruit flavors. So this, again, is quite dark in color, but not as dark as the Meiomi. So I'm beginning to think there must be something in that wine to make that color so dark, because Pinot usually is not the darkest grape on the planet. And yeah, well, it smells of ripe fruit, that's for sure. So it smells of stewed fruit, strawberries, blackberries, and you also have notes of figs, prunes. There's a mix of dried and stewed fruit flavors. On the palate, there's that sweetness again. So it's kind of round. The tannins are slightly aggressive. The acidity is also a little bit green. So you really have the mix of ripe fruit and underripe fruit and overripe fruit, which isn't a great mix. I think that one big reason why those wines are controversial is that many wines that are successful on the mass market actually don't taste and smell the way us wine nerds want them to taste and smell. They are riper, richer, more velvety on the palate, have more sugar, less acidity. Yeah, and that's not necessarily something that I look for when I taste wines, especially not if I taste red wines. So I'm going to rate this 78 points. I think it's a bit of a disappointment. I mean, I didn't expect much from it, but the nose was okay. But on the palate, this kind of mix of harsh tannins, harsh acidity, and cooked fruit, that's no fun. I mean, the Prisoner definitely is a lot better than this. I mean, it's also a lot more expensive, but anyways, this, yeah. Oh, so let's move on to the wine that I actually started this video with. It's the 2003 Chateau Pavie. And yeah, I wanted to taste this wine for a long time. So when Jancis Robinson and Robert Parker thought about this wine, I actually just started getting into wine. So I was fascinated by this battle. And in order to highlight how different those opinions were, I want to read out the tasting notes that they gave. So about exactly the same wine, Jancis wrote, deep bluish crimson, completely unappetizing overripe aromas. Why? Porty sweet. Oh, really? Port is best from the Douro, not Saint-Emilion. Ridiculous wine more reminiscent of a late harvest Zinfandel than a red Bordeaux, with its unappetizing green notes. Robert Parker, on the other hand, wrote, it is a wine of sublime richness, minerality, delineation and nobleness, representing the essence of one of Saint-Emilion's greatest terroirs. The limestone and clay soils were perfect for handling the torrid heat of 2003. So who was right here? I should also add that Robert Parker initially rated it 97 to 100 points, and then in the end settled at 96 points. And Jancis rated it at 12 points, which is kind of the worst score that she could give. But there are also conflicting opinions on those publications. So Neil Martin rated the wine much lower on robertparker.com, while Julia Harding rated it higher on jancisrobinson.com. Pavie is located on the right bank in Bordeaux, in Saint-Emilion, close to many other famous estates. The soils are clay and limestone, and it's owned by the Peirce family, and they have experimented quite a bit with slightly controversial winemaking techniques, like using a lot of new oak, or producing wines that are very concentrated and rich, and I think that's what ticked off Jancis back then. The vintage 2003 was a very hot vintage in Europe, and many winemakers didn't know how to deal with it. I remember well how in 2003 many German winemakers produced those extremely concentrated and rich fruit bombs because they thought, well, great, we have lots of sunshine and lots of concentration. But the wines didn't really have the balance they needed in order to age, and many of them are tired by now. So let's see how the Pavie is doing now. Shall we? The bottle is actually in pretty perfect condition. The level is still really high. It's up here. And the cork looks really good. So yeah, I'm expecting this to be at least in good condition. But that doesn't give me any information on whether this is still alive. So the cork looks pretty great. I mean, the condition is perfect. I'm expecting this to have quite a bit of sediment, so I will decant it. Just to be sure, just for fun. Yeah, I mean, the color is brown, that's for sure. I'll just rinse out the carafe, give it a little taste. I mean, the wine definitely has a slightly brownish rim, or not just slightly, it's quite brown towards the rim, like garnet color. The core is still ruby though, so there's still good color there, but yeah, the wine shows some signs of aging. On the nose, it smells of dried figs, prunes. There's also cherry fruit flavor coming through. A lot of chocolatey, kind of dark chocolate flavors as well. And on the palate, there's good concentration, quite a lot of power. The tannins, in my opinion, are not green, but they are very grippy. And I mean, this has 14% of alcohol. So in the early 2000s, this might have been extraordinary that a wine from Saint-Emilion would have 14% of alcohol, but nowadays that's kind of absolutely normal. So I don't think this wine would actually be as hotly debated today. I don't think it's the most elegant Bordeaux, but it's also not the most over-the-top Bordeaux that I've tasted. Pavie is well known for producing these powerful, really astringent, tannic monsters in some cases. But when they age, they actually develop and become more palatable, more enjoyable. And I think this is actually quite delicious. I mean, it's a big wine, but not a bad wine by any means. So I'm afraid that I actually have to side with Bob here. I mean, this is a big and concentrated, rich wine from Bordeaux. It's actually, it's still quite tasty considering that it's more than 20 years old and from a vintage that didn't necessarily produce the most age-worthy wines. So this is very good. That said, I like a little bit more elegance, a little bit more freshness, a little bit more precision, but I'm still going to rate this 93 points. I definitely have this with braised meat. I think this would be a delicious combo. Not necessarily a summer wine, though. So after tasting all those big and bold wines, I need some freshness, and I want to finish off with a wine that is still pretty controversial. Not necessarily in wine nerd circles, but I know many people all around the globe that really hate this wine. I mean, not this wine in particular, but this style of wine. This is the Lustau Fino Jarana from Jerez Sherry. Sherry is from southern Spain, and it's a wine style that is made just in a very different fashion. I made a whole video about sherry if you want to check that out. But the main thing is that sherry is made using a Solera system where different vintages, different base wines are blended. And there are two main styles. One is the Oloroso style that is made using oxidative methods. So the wine oxidizes in barrel over a long time, becomes slightly brown, and has those nutty flavors. And the other path is the Fino way, I'd describe it, where the wine is covered with flor yeast. So there's a layer of flor on top of the wine while it's in barrel. And that yeast protects the wine from oxidation. So you have completely different flavors. The wine is pale in color. It has those yeasty, briny notes, and it can taste absolutely delicious. So let's taste this just to finish this off. So this is absolutely pale straw color. This is kind of what you would expect from a Fino sherry. And on the nose, there are those flavors that some people really hate and I really adore them. There's this note of briny kind of character, yeastiness, a little bit of broth, meatiness, but there's also roasted nuts. So it's a wild and funky mix. And yeah, so Fino sherry in particular is really an acquired taste. And on the palate, there's intense alcohol. I mean, this is at 15% of alcohol. There's great freshness, grippiness, even though the acidity is also not so high, but this is completely dry. So this has this bone dry kind of texture. There's nuttiness on the aftertaste. So it's a wild mix that many people just don't really enjoy. And this is definitely a wine style that is for people who are deep into wine already and really want to explore something extreme, something really different. And this is why this, even though it is kind of a mass market product, but why this is not necessarily for everyone. It divides the audience. It's definitely a controversial wine. But if you ask me, this is kind of the most delicious wine style there is. And it's usually pretty cheap as well. And for summer, this is great. Just chill it down, sit out on the terrace or in your living room, doesn't matter. Have a glass of this and just enjoy life. So I'm going to rate this 91 points. I think it's absolutely delicious. I think it's pretty affordable. And at that price point, yeah, this sherry is just definitely a great value if you like it. If you don't, then this is crap. This was definitely a controversial tasting, and I'm already looking forward to hearing all of your differing opinions in the comments section of this video. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the wines in order to tell you which ones to drink and which ones to avoid, in my personal opinion. So definitely avoid this. This is absolutely horrible. This one is something you should taste if you're into funky and wild wines. The Meiomi, I don't know. No, I wouldn't want to drink that again. I don't think this is good. If you like this style of wine, maybe stick to Zinfandel. And this would be a Zinfandel that I'd recommend. I mean, it's pretty good in quality. It's widely available and it's interesting. I quite enjoyed this. This one, on the other hand, is a wine that I would definitely not want to drink. It's just not good. So avoid. And those two, I mean, very different styles of wine, but I think the Pavie was quite delicious. It's not a cheap wine. It's quite expensive. So you definitely would want to be sure that you like big and bold reds, but then this might be right up your alley. And this one, I mean, no risk because it's fairly cheap and it's absolutely delicious if you like the style of wine. And that's kind of, that's a question that I can't necessarily answer. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. This, by the way, is my new studio. So I'm looking forward to hearing whether you like it or not. I'm keeping the old one, don't worry, but this is also fun. So I'll mix it up every now and then. Whatever you do, stay thirsty.